Welcome to the Coaching Compass, where I talk to elite performance coaches about what it takes to build a successful career in high performance. And today's guest is Gerry Ramogida, or Dr. Gerry Ramogida. Gerry is a performance therapist and doctor of chiropractic. He's one of the most accomplished performance practitioners that I've had the pleasure of meeting. He has worked think out. Have you worked in the MLB?
Yeah,
Okay, so you've worked in
a
literally
little bit
all
with the
five of
Mariners.
the
Yeah.
top North American professional sports: NBA, MLB, NHL, MLS, and NFL, which is crazy. I don't think a lot of people can say that. And yeah, really excited to kind of hear and learn from you a little bit, Gerry, today about how you've built kind of a career worth having in high performance sport. And
Oh,
so
excited
welcome
to
to the
be
show.
here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here and obviously converse with you and with the history we have. And congratulations to you on building this community and everything you've done in the esports world and the performance in that arena. So yeah, happy to be
Appreciate
here.
it. Appreciate
Yeah.
it. So let's start, I guess, at the beginning. Usually a good place to start. So maybe share with me a little bit about what got you into, or what made you want to get into sport, and then the, let's call it, the therapy side of sport,
Right.
to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, sport for me, growing up, I played everything that my parents would let me play. Um, so I grew up primarily playing soccer. I wanted to play hockey. My dad was the came from Italy, and hockey was at that time practice was at 4 or 5, 6 in the morning. There was no way that was happening for hockey. So I was pretty much limited to soccer, and then things we could do at school, track and field, played baseball. I love being active, and I always believe in that, sport is really being involved in sports is really, it's a microcosm of life, and it teaches you all the skills that you need to be successful in life in general. So I always appreciated sport. I was hyper competitive. Um, Played football through high school and really loved the game. Played quarterback and secondary, so corner safety, and had some opportunities to play university football, but realized given my size, I was 5'10", 100 in high school, shoot, 165 pounds, 175 pounds, maybe. I knew that wasn't the recipe for becoming a professional athlete. So I then set off on this idea to go into chiropractic or medicine or physiotherapy. I didn't know, but I got accepted at UBC and started down the path of a bachelor in science with that goal of somewhere in the medical field. And, you know, always in the back of my mind, wanting to do something that allowed me to stay involved in sport. And then it was actually watching Super Bowl that gave me the idea that I could potentially be involved. It was the 49ers playing the Bengals, and there was a brief pan of the sideline, and they showed Jerry Rice on a chiropractic table,
Hmm.
and some work being done during the Super Bowl on the side of the field, and I was like, whoa, that's really cool. I
Yeah.
wonder, I didn't at the time, didn't fully know the story. And ironically, taking a course in later years, I met the chiropractor who was
No
there
way.
doing that work as Dr. Athens. And but yeah, I always had this desire to be involved in sport, and you know, got through university, went down the path, UBC medicine, did all my interviews and went through the 4 rounds and such, and then had also applied to chiropractic schools, and just as kind of fate had it, I ended up down at Western States Chiropractic College in Portland, Oregon, and kind of took that road. Yeah, and
Why specifically chiropractic and not one of the many other kind of disciplines you could have chosen to get on field?
yeah, part of it was my upbringing and my exposure to chiropractic. My dad, he, as I mentioned, he came from Italy. He was about 16, and then he had the skills that he came with and that his brothers here had, and he was doing bricklaying
Right.
and stonework, and then ultimately went into residential contracting. But because of that, he often had aches and pains and low back pain. And I remember days where he'd spend 2 days lying flat on the floor because his low back was so bad. And I watched this for a number of years, and he would go to the GP and come home with, muscle relaxants and, the things that you would typically do anyway in an acute situation. Um, and then he started seeing a chiropractor and just saw the benefit of it. He was, if he had an incident, he'd recover quicker. He was back at work faster, and the incidents were less frequent. And then because of that, in the sports I played, and I did a lot of downhill skiing and things, he had me go,
Hmm.
and I just felt the benefits. And so for me, it kind of just opened up that window as potentially this being a path as well. And to be honest with you, it was funny. I applied, like I said, to UBC medicine, and got through the the final interview, when I was meeting with the dean of admissions, Dr. Carter. Uh, you know, and I had, it was after fourth year finishing my bachelor's, and he just said to me in the interview, he goes, you have a great application, but I think you need some life experience, and
Hmm.
so take a year off, and then reapply in future. And I was thinking, yeah, that's a great thing in theory to go travel and do things, but having been a full-time student all the way through and having a few acceptances at different chiropractic colleges is like, okay, this is definitely, this is the way I'm going, and it kind
Right.
of pushed me in that path. Yeah.
Okay. And so I talk a lot with people around like the academic schooling and then like the skills and experience you need to actually know how to have an impact within a high performance environment. So as you were in school, you still I assume were gunning towards like be able to work in pro sport. What did your schooling years look like, and what did you maybe, if anything, what did you complement your studies with to ensure that you were on the correct path towards your goal?
Yeah, it was the education and the skills you're taught. Always envisioning working in sport. We had a sports chiropractic club. you know, when I was going through, there were opportunities for some volunteer things when there were events, and we do some simple things like community runs or
Mm.
things like that. Um, but when I think back in terms of that skill development, I took some extra seminars outside of the core curriculum around soft tissue treatment at the time. Myofascial trigger points, just finding the tight spot and holding pressure was kind of where the level of skill was at. And then massage, effleurage, petrissage, Swedish, those types of hands-on techniques. And so I learned those things with the intention of application to working with athletes. um, but it wasn't really until I got out of school, and then with my intention or desire to be involved in sport, I just really started reaching out to wherever I could to become involved with teams. And at the time, I started my first practice with a chiropractor, Gabrielle LaSalle, who afforded me incredible opportunity and freedom to kind of practice however I felt. I went, there was the ice rink was right across the street. The Langley Rugby Club was just down the road, and they had first, second, third division and a women's team. Soccer, there was, soccer all around. And I just basically knowing that that's what I wanted to do was I just went and volunteered everywhere. And so almost every night of the week, I'd be out of practice and have my table on the side and or at the rink. And then because my office was so close, many of them just came across. And where it really, where things really opened up and where I could really see how I could specifically impact athlete performance was initially being exposed to ART, or active release techniques. At the time it was this new technique, and there was, there was a big article written at the time on Gerry Roberts,
Mm.
and Dr. Mark Lindsay was working with Gerry, and
Yeah.
they were speaking as to how this technique helped with performance and movement. And I was like, man, I need I need to learn this. And so I took the first seminar, and you know Dr. Mike Leahy obviously was the founder of ART, and for decades he felt that he needed to be present at every course taught, because to he just felt that it was his kind of obligation to do that for people coming and paying to take this course.
Mm.
And you know in getting to know Mike and then ultimately dedicating myself to it, because it took all these, it had principles like know your anatomy. Like if you're a therapist and you want to work with an athlete and you need to influence specific tissues, you need to be able to define where are those tissues, at what level, at what layer, what are your hands over, what movements will accentuate your ability to influence specific tissues. And the other aspect of that was, in ART at that time were guys who were doing what I dreamed of doing. Mark Lindsay was working with Donovan Bailey in the highest level in track and field, and a guy named Rob DiStefano was working with the New York Giants, and John Schneider was working with the New York Jets. And so all these guys were these guys who were just a lot of fun to be around,
Mm.
and were happy to mentor and teach and offer their expertise. And that's probably when I get people, new providers or physios or chiros or massage therapists or anyone who comes and shadows and wants to learn, the biggest impact on me were those mentors who just gave you the direction. They'd already made a lot of the mistakes, and they kind of made the path a little easier. And so that diving into ART, really knowing my anatomy, really understanding how I could influence movement, that was kind of the foundation. And then through that and in parallel, I had started working with some local track kids and a local coach named Kevin Tyler. Because of that and my hands-on skills, ended up at nationals. And then with both roads, both led to this. We had an ART biomechanics course down at the University of Texas with Dan Path. And at the same time, I was working with athletes who were Canadian, and at the time, Dan was working with Donovan Bailey and Bruni Surin and Mark Boswell on a number of these elite level Canadians. So my circle was bringing me to this relationship with Dan Path, and he was another one, obviously, in terms of a mentor who influenced the trajectory of my career and how I practice. Dan has probably the single biggest impact, and his whole thing was, if you know how an athlete's supposed to move, if you understand I started with him with sprinting, and he knew kind of what the mechanics should look like, as an athlete accelerates from the blocks and out. And so I spent many, many hours with him just trackside watching, and he'd be like, okay, watch from behind and watch this one athlete's right foot, and just watch. and he I was afforded the opportunity to learn the mechanics from the view of a coach and what he was trying to accomplish and how he explained that to the athlete so the athlete understood what they were trying to do. And then again, guys, the mentors I spoke, Mark Lindsay, Mark Scappaticci, they were already kind of working in this model with Dan, with these athletes and doing minor inputs to improve what we were seeing. And I just kind of followed in that pathway with them, and we'd go down and I'd go for a week and literally be on the track from morning till they shut it down, and just working for the experience and trying to see how we could improve what we were seeing, obviously seeing if the athlete actually felt better. But the beautiful thing about sprinting was the stopwatch doesn't lie. You're either making an improvement or you're not.
Right.
And so, track was just the perfect training ground in which to kind of put it all together.
You've spoken a little bit about volunteering and like just
Right.
gaining that experience. How much of this work did you get paid for?
Yeah.
Um, I guess let's start there.
Yeah. Very little. Very
Mm,
little. I just always believed that locally there were guys well established. Dr. Wilbur Kelsick, um, and a number of other guys were already established. They were known for their work. Wilbur was with Athletics Canada and was kind of the chiropractor for Athletics Canada. Um, and I just felt okay, like I can't just assume and roll in that they're going to want me involved just because I'm here. And so I just really believed I needed as much as experience as I could to learn and then have the skills to set myself apart. And yeah, I mean, I've said in the past for the first 7 years, if I got expenses taken care of, I was happy. And it was always at a loss because when you traveled with athletes in track, it was 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks. You're in Europe and you're going from city to city at international competitions, and you might get your flights covered.
yeah.
But every day you're not in the office, you're losing money and the
Hmm.
overhead's still there. So it was, I just, I just always believed and that working in those environments and becoming efficient in those environments and being able to make a difference at the highest levels of competition when the stress was the highest
Yeah.
was really what would then afford me the opportunity to work in sport.
And so if I'm a young student of chiropractic or in any of these fields, like let's say I'm in school or I've just graduated, the world's a little bit different now. But so like, how did you survive that period so that you could obviously a guy has to eat and
All
you're
right.
you're volunteering your time. How did you survive and how have things maybe changed or not changed nowadays? How would you advise the next generation to think about volunteering and this kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I was over the top. I mean,
Mm,
I was literally I would put in the full day when I wasn't traveling. And fortunately in those early days I was involved with all the local teams, but I was heavily involved in terms of travel with track. And track, the season and the most competitive phase is in the summer.
mm,
So the travel and the long durations away really happen through the summer. But I was doing full day of clinic, and then Wednesday night would be the rugby club, and Thursday night I'd actually drive from Aldergrove to UBC and work with UBC football. Then we were spending time with the BC Lions, my business partner and I with our downtown clinic. Basically, there wasn't a night of the week that I wasn't going from practice to elsewhere to put in a few hours. Uh, I think as someone coming out of school, I mean, you really have to ask yourself, like, I've seen this more and more where people feel that simply graduating and having the title conveys some right to be paid. And
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, you should know your worth and understand the skills you bring, but you need to look at the other side as to why should this group be paying me, especially when you're new and you haven't proven through any means in the real world yet that you can deliver something of value. Um, so I think there's a balance. You know, I do I do I think people should do what I did to that same extreme? Probably not, because there are also costs on the other side with your relationships with others and being home late and leaving in the morning and you know my late wife, you know, that relationship at time was strained because I had this single-minded focus that I
Mm.
was gonna be as I was gonna do as much as I needed to do to get where I wanted to get to. Um, so you know, for someone new, I would say look at the time you have and just make a commitment to spending what you can afford to spend
Yeah.
and reach out and volunteer more for your own betterment than an expectation of immediate return. You
Right.
know, it's that idea of delayed gratification.
Yeah.
Today, and if you talk, they say the biggest issue with kids today is there's immediate gratification in everything they do because of our computers and phones and there's probably something to be said for that.
Mm.
But you know, I just think you have to put in some effort to develop the skills to show why you're different and show some value. You know, I look back and that volunteering, that work on the track with Kevin Tyler, with these young guys, and fortunate for us, a couple of them made it to that international level. It was that volunteering that led to connections, that led to working with Dan, and then Dan knew my skills and I was working with his athletes and they spoke highly. Those athletes demanded that I be present
Hmm.
at international competitions when it came to Olympics and it came to world championships. Because at the time, chiropractic was not widely accepted as something to be in the tent.
Yeah.
And it was the athletes ultimately who said, I want this guy here. I remember one time I was working at the oh, Commonwealth Games in Manchester, and it was funny because I was allowed to go, but I was in when we got to where the track was. They had kind of they had developed these containers, and that's where everyone treated was in these containers. Well, I was by myself in my own container. We have pictures of it, and it's like you know, it wasn't where chiropractic was integrated as part of a normal delivery. And it wasn't until guys like Dr. Jack Taunton, who we both know well, who's not, passed 2 years ago now, but he was a champion. He saw the skills that chiropractors brought, and he demanded in 2010 that chiropractic be part of the core group of medical provision for the Olympics, and that was the first time it was inclusively
Was it the first time?
added.
Crazy.
Yeah, there was always chiropractic present.
Sure.
I went
Yes.
to Athens before and other Olympics, but he was the first one that made it a part of the core provision of services. And so, yeah, I mean, going back to that, it's just you the volunteering from a financial standpoint may feel like a loss, but often it's those opportunities you give yourself in service that you learn the most and make connections that ultimately shape the path of your career.
You talked about players demanding your services
Mhm.
and coming. I'm curious if looking back and maybe even more recently in your career too, how much of that is just down to the craft itself, is like your the magic of your fingers, let's say, and
Right.
knowledge, versus how you made them feel, the relationship you built with them, that side of things. Like what's the magic sauce mix there?
I think there has to be obviously a foundational level of skill.
Yes.
And I think at the level where you want to work in elite sport, there are some foundations that you have to have. You have to know your anatomy. I mentioned, uh, um, Mike Leahy, ART, and the demanding of knowing the anatomy. And then I met Dr. Guy Boyer, an osteopath out of France, who took that to another level. That it just expanded my understanding and knowledge around anatomy and specific techniques to get down to the minutia of anatomy, and like the smallest ligaments and how those have impact on overall movement, and concepts like micro movements dictate macro movements, and regional interdependence, and all these things. um, but there's a level of, you have to have effective techniques to influence the tissues you want. You have to know your anatomy so that you can influence those tissues appropriately. Uh, so that's a given for
Mm.
anyone that wants to survive in the environment. And then there's the human side, no question. Um, and being involved in sport, growing up and competing and suffering many of the injuries that athletes suffer along the way, you know, that human side definitely has an impact for sure. You know, I can remember a situation where we were all getting ready for a race. I think it was the Commonwealth Games, and another provider said to an athlete, literally within 10 minutes to the call up, "Oh my gosh, your hip flexors are so tight." And I'm sitting there going, wow, like, as a therapist, you have a privilege that you're often the last person
Mm.
that an athlete will speak to before they go to do what they do.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like, it doesn't matter what you find at that point in time, you're just building confidence.
Yes.
You're communicating, okay, you prepared, you know, you don't have to do anything more than you've already done to get yourself here. Just, and so that human aspect for sure. And part of it comes down to, like, when I got into the NFL, and these higher leagues, part of that is on the human side, is understanding your role in the machinery of that team, and where you fit, and not trying to do too much and be a hero, because that's the quickest way to find yourself outside of those environments.
Mm.
Knowing what your role is, what the expectation is, doing the best job you possibly can within that role. And then if you have issue, or you feel you're limited, or you can do more, talking to the people who are you're working with and who supervise you.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's one thing consistently I've seen when people are asked to leave, or they're no longer renewed, is often because they're trying to do too much to impress the athlete in front of them, without understanding their role within the bigger team. Um, so the human part, the skills are one thing, and the skills are given. Like, you're not going to pretend your way through.
Yes.
If you're not getting the results,
Mm.
the athletes are gonna know, and they just won't come to see you, so you won't get used,
Mm.
and that gets noticed.
Yes.
How you talk to an individual, and most people in these professions, you go through education, history taking, listening to the patient, the client in front of you. Those are the biggest skills. Rick Celebrini, Dr. Rick Celebrini, who you know well, he reminded me of the saying, let your patient talk, they'll tell you what's wrong. Let them talk longer, they'll tell you how to fix it. And
Right.
it's really just that human side of listening and making people feel heard. Hands-on therapy, because you're going to touch someone, you have to build that level of trust for sure and make people feel comfortable around you. So, you know, it might be a 50-50 thing, where 50% the skills for sure and 50% are the soft skills. So yeah, definitely both.
Do you have, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you have any like tried and tested questions or ways to, even like you're going in to see a new athlete or a new team, how are you going to, again, you don't want to be trying to prove your worth, because to your point that's not ever going to turn out well, but like how do you do that naturally? Are there certain techniques or questions or things that you've used over and over again, or is it just kind of trusting your experience and going with the flow?
There's a level of going with the flow, but when I think back to situations, you asked about MLB, like one of the, I, I went to work. I got asked to come in and assess an athlete for the Mariners, and I didn't know it at the time, but it was kind of a test. They wanted to see what I could pick up by evaluating this athlete, and they didn't give me the full history and things like that. And so, what I always do, regardless of the environment, who I'm seeing, where we are, I have in my mind, for me, everything comes down to quality of movement, regardless of the sport. The sport, each sport, and even with each position on the field or on the pitch or on the ice, each position now also has unique demands
Mm.
based on, like, a corner in football is going to be spending more time backpedaling and then having to open up, or a goaltender in the NHL is going to be doing all kinds of movements through their hips that are just your hips weren't meant to make. And so that's for sure, or a given. But fundamentally, we know that each region of the body has to provide a certain defined type of movement. And so I always have a progression that I go through. I start at the feet, assess the feet. How do the feet move? How does the midfoot feel? Are they dropping through their arches? Um, do they have good quality dorsiflexion? Because fundamentally, if they're lacking dorsiflexion, we have knock-on effects all the way up. Does the knee internally and externally rotate? Does the hip, what's the hip range like? Then looking, generally at the pelvis, how's the position? And then can they rotate through the junction between the lower and mid back? Because if that rotation doesn't occur there, we're going to force movement somewhere else where it's not physiologically designed to occur. And then looking at the shoulder girdle, arm movement, arm range, or shoulder range, and then looking at the neck. So I in any environment, that's my fundamental progression. And this test with the Mariners and the head trainer and this athlete, they were telling me, I can't even remember what the issue was. It was something in a hip or maybe low back. And the first thing I go to his right ankle, and there's literally no dorsiflexion.
Mm.
And I'm like, wow, this is really stiff. And he's like, yeah, I had surgery there 2 years ago. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, so when I was going through the history, you guys didn't really feel that was something pertinent to tell me about when I asked about previous surgeries and significant injuries. But having a process that is specific to what you're trying to accomplish and evaluate based on your needs to do your job, having that is is extremely valuable, because
Hmm.
then it doesn't matter the environment. You have your process, you know what it's going to look like. And I can tell you, we had when you have 20 minutes before the Olympic final and everyone's amped and everyone's excited, including the athlete, and they're trying to calm themselves down. You can't help but kind of feel that energy.
Yeah.
And they have a name for it. It's called five ring fever, where people start doing crazy things in and around the Olympics just because it's the Olympics, and the gravity they feel because of it. So when you have those fundamental progressions, you always can come back to it.
Yes. Yeah. It grounds
And
you. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like a warm up progression for an athlete.
Mm.
We had when in track, we Dan had a very specific warm up and drill progressions that took 25, 30 minutes, could be longer if based on the day and the need. But what that provided is sometimes, and it included mobility and things like that. But what it provided for the athlete was always a grounded process to get ready, regardless of the chaos around them. And so that principle, regardless of what profession you are in the performance environment, is, have a progression of what you need to fundamentally know to then be able to move forward with whatever you need to implement.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Going back to that, the art and the science and the combination of the two kind of they feed off of each other.
right.
Gerry, there's probably two more questions that are related I want to ask here before we're unfortunately going to have to wrap up for today. But we haven't even got to like your pro career, which is probably a whole nother episode in itself. But um, the question is on longevity, and I guess the first question is: you were, I think, 17 years with the Seahawks in the NFL.
Hmm.
How does one last that long in a single organization? How did you create that success for yourself?
You know, I think part of it is being fortunate
Mm, sure.
to be part of an organization that was relatively stable. I came in under Mike Holmgren. He coached, I can't even remember how many years, but it was a good chunk. We had 1 year with Jim Mora Jr. that ended in 1 year. And then Pete Carroll came in, and he was there through to when I left in 2018. Part of it was I came in at the same time as a gentleman named Sam Ramsden, who was an athletic therapist. He came with Mike Holmgren from Green Bay, and um, he was very supportive of the ideas I brought in terms of how manual therapy could integrate into the whole of what everyone was trying to do, and he's still there today. And so, I got to work with a good group of people. I had someone who supported what I was doing. But you know what? Part of it too is it goes back to what I was saying in terms of the inclusion is, if the athletes really want you there, if if you're if you're bringing value with what you provide, and elite sport, pro sport can be extremely cruel, as you know. I mean, look at what just happened with the Canucks
Yeah.
yesterday or the
Yeah.
day before.
Yeah.
You know, the whole staff dismissed after one season, when, you can argue, did they have the best roster to work with to be judged upon? But pro sports it often isn't fair. The only thing you can do, I think, that gives you the opportunity at longevity is doing the best you can with each athlete, each opportunity you get. And it's one athlete at a time, and one treatment at a time, and one interaction at a time, that gives you the opportunity for people to express that they want you there.
And I guess the follow-up question to longevity is, you've been in high performance now for a very long time, and we know that the toll it takes and the sacrifices, you've touched on that a little bit already too. How how do you navigate a career in this space successfully? What do you have to come in kind of eyes wide open knowing before you do, and then how do you, because not only have you done it a long time, but you've done it in multiple, like, very high performance environments across the continent. And so, yeah, what are your pearls of wisdom for the young grad going, I want a career in pro sport, I want to follow Dr. Ramagida's footsteps? What do they have to know?
Wow. You know, great question. You have to know why you're doing
Mm,
it. Why do you want to be there? It has to come from a place of, like, for me, it was an appreciation of what these athletes do and can I help them express those abilities a little bit better as a small part. And for longevity, you just have, I mean, once you're in it and you have the opportunity to do that, you have to see, do you love it? Do you enjoy it as much as you thought you would? Because I mean, I learned very quickly, it's not, everyone envisions this, the elite, the highest levels, the biggest leagues, the that everything is done first class,
yes.
treatments are the best you'll ever see, coaching methodology is respected at the highest levels. It's not. You know, it's, you get, you see all kinds of things and you're like, really, this is what's happening at this level at various times. And so really, it's not glamorous. The travel is tiring. You know, you travel well in the leagues, but still, when you have a back to back in between two cities and the game ends at 10, and then the next city is a 3 hour flight and a 2 hour time change, and you still have to be, and you get in at 3 in the morning and you have to be up at 9 or 10 because you need to be available for athletes. It's tiring. So you once you've had the opportunity, you just need to see, does it drive you? Does it make you want to keep getting up to do those things? Are you getting from it what you're putting in? Uh, and do you enjoy it? And a big part of that is who you're working with, and does the organization show appreciation for your efforts? But at the end of the day, you have to find, you know, your area where you're getting some fulfillment from what you're doing. Because I can tell you, for the championships and the Olympic medals or world championship medals in track and things, holy smokes, I can put those on one hand. The number of disappointments, the just the painful injuries at the most inopportune moments, the disappointment that we feel, the Super Bowl loss on the 2 yard line, like those occurrences are 99% of the time. And so it helps you to then really appreciate those opportunities when you do reach the mountaintop. Um, but again, the fulfillment has to come from your daily contribution, that you believe and know that you're making a small difference as part of the collective to that group, to those athletes.
Appreciate that answer. Last one, we'll end on a fun one as we wrap up
Sure.
here. So, like, we've touched on it. You've been part of so many unique and exciting high performance environments. Is there an environment in sport or an organization within sport that you haven't worked in yet that you would really like to still?
Boy, that's a great question. I mean, I love Formula One,
Hmm.
and I just it that looks like. I mean, I listen. I was just telling you how tiring travel is and time
Yeah.
zone changes, and so that may. I mean, that is a different beast and probably has a lot of those things. But that looks like it could be a lot of fun
Yeah.
on an F1 team
Yeah.
potentially one day. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Cool.
Um, I worked uh, with a number of Premier League players when I was in the UK, and then and since, but never fully integrated full time
Yes.
in the Premier League. And I'm a long suffering Arsenal fan, so
Hey, well,
it was
congratulations.
well, it was glorious to see, you know.
Long time coming.
So, it maybe something that
Cool.
or even in Italy and Serie A or
Yeah.
things like that, but maybe.
I like it. I like it. Well, Jerry, I'm super grateful for your time and spending it with me and answering my questions. And for those listening, um, you have a chance to dive a little bit deeper with Jerry. We run a performance coaching community where we will have Jerry in for a community call and asking him all the questions I wasn't able to ask today. And if you're interested in learning more, the link will be in the show notes. But Jerry, thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to seeing what you do next.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for reaching out and yeah, looking forward to the next conversation.